Welcome everyone to the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council meeting. It's nice to be back together again, and thank you for taking the time to be here. I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone. I'd like to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves, and if we could start with you, Laura.
Hello everyone. It's so great to see you all in person. My name is Laura Vernon, and I'm the Great Salt Lake Coordinator with the Department of Natural Resources.
Hi, I'm Joe Havasey. I'm the Director of Natural Resources for Compass Minerals, representing extraction industry.
Sorry for the recording. If you could tap the button, if it's green, it's working. If it's red, you have a private moment.
Joe Havasey, Compass Minerals, representing extraction industry.
Hi, I'm Jeff Richards. I represent Minority Bird Production.
That was pretty fun. I'm Dan Tuttle, Tooele County. Glad to be here, and a lot of you people have changed.
I'm Dina Blaze. I'm the Director of Regional Development for Salt Lake County.
Don Leonard, Chairman of the Great Salt Lake Brine Shrimp Cooperative, representing aquaculture.
Ann Neville, the Nature Conservancy.
Waylon Myers, I represent sewers.
Tom Ward, representing municipalities.
Right. Welcome.
Carla Troutman, Weber State University.
Teresa Cockayne, Rio Tinto, Kennecott.
Tim Knox, the brine shrimp industry.
Mondro Masson, Central Davis.
Paul Harding, Jacobs Engineering. Mark Bromley, just some guys, my first day volunteering here. Nathan Dabbs, Catwalk Industry.
Dave Clark, Bone Common Associates.
Candace Oxbeaver, Water Resources.
Rob Hartman, U.S. Magnesium.
Ryan Doherty, Federal Salt.
And Pam Kramer, Utah Division of Wildlife Resources.
Thank you, everyone. We do have a quorum with 8 out of the 11 members in attendance who are represented. Is the Davis County representative here? Okay. You all received an agenda last week, a proposed agenda for the meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Ann. Second, Dan. Thank you. Any debate or discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. You also received the meeting notes of our May 12, 2021 meeting. We received no corrections or revisions to those notes, so I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
So moved.
Thank you, Jeff. Second, Dana.
Second.
Thank you. Any debate or discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Let's briefly turn to some committee reports, council and project status updates, and I'll ask Laura to give a brief report on the June 17 meeting of the Salinity Advisory Committee.
Sure. You guys move quick in all of your motions. Well, it was an exciting time for the Salinity Advisory Committee in June. We worked on identifying a salinity range for the south arm of the Great Salt Lake, so we're near finalization of that. We asked the committee to vote on a salinity range that would be beneficial for uses in the south arm, and they did so, and that range is 120 to 160 grams per liter. So the memo regarding this salinity range will be finalized by the end of the month, and we'll have that to the council for review. But similar to the Great Salt Lake matrix that we have for the entire lake, we also are developing a salinity matrix for all of the different resources and how impacts to salinity impact each of the resources. So it'll be exciting to see.
Thank you, Laura. Any questions about the Salinity Advisory Committee meeting? Okay, I'll comment briefly on a couple of our projects. First of all, integrating water and land use planning. We'll have a presentation on that today, and so I'll skip that one. Next, the GSL equation of state. The Salinity Advisory Committee had recommended to us an update on salinity calculations and methodology, and at our September meeting, we'll receive that final report, which is near final right now. If it's final in advance, we'll get it to you. Next, I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about communications. In 2019, we contracted with R&R to help us gain a wider and deeper reach with our reports and our messages. We've previously produced a lot of, I think, really quality, credible material and information, and maybe struggled getting it out beyond just a small group. And so in 2019-20, they prepared a communications strategy for us, provided some media and communications training for Laura, and prepared talking points, both general and specific, and then started preparing press releases for us based upon the product that we've been producing. In 2020-21, they prepared press releases, some additional talking points, made media contacts, created a 5-minute video, which will be complete soon, and we'll have that at the September meeting. It'll be very useful in helping explain to people the importance of Great Salt Lake. And they also prepared a 1-page handout. Laura brought a few copies, but it's posted on our website. It looks like this. The Division of Water Resources actually asked Laura if there was a simple 1-page summary we could give to people to help them understand the importance of the lake. And R&R helped Laura prepare that, and it is on our website if you'd like to have a look-see. And she brought a few copies, but not enough for everyone. I think they're over on the table, if there are any left. Recently, with the Great Salt Lake dropping below the historic low elevation, we saw an opportunity for some broad coverage, and we coordinated with the governor's office, who issued a press release on the record low lake levels, and we coordinated with the Department of Natural Resources, which issued their own release, and then we issued a release at the same time. See if I have it handy here. Anyway, I can't find where I put it, but we issued that release, and other individuals and groups also issued releases about the low lake level. It's really quite amazing the coverage that issue received. Locally, KSL TV, radio, and .com featured it. Fox 13 television featured it. They used the satellite images showing the contraction over time that you see quite often in presentations. It's quite compelling, and maybe I think the most compelling local media report. Deseret News, Salt Lake Tribune, Daily Herald, Salt Lake City Weekly, KUER did a 30-minute program on it. The Daily Universe, KJazz, ABC4, CW30. Nationally, the Associated Press, USA Today, Economic Times, and Yahoo News picked it up. And then, I'm sure the list is much longer than I can read, but to give you a flavor of the kind of coverage it received, there were reports of it at WOKV Radio in Jacksonville, Florida, Edwardsville Intelligencer, Pennsylvania News, Texas News Today, Las Vegas Sun, Brooklyn Daily Eagle, Philadelphia Inquirer, Minneapolis Star Tribune, the Belarus News. I'm sure you're all subscribed to that one. ETV News, St. Louis Public Radio, Tacoma News Tribune, University of Illinois News, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So partly the topic was maybe more compelling for broad coverage, but the help we've received, I think, with our communication strategy and knowing how and where to get these things out, I think has been really helpful with that issue. Any questions or comments about that? Okay, let's move to the meat of our agenda. We have 3 presentations today, and then a fairly significant discussion item. We'll start with the Great Salt Lake Watershed Council development. In September of 2017, we issued our document on the water for Great Salt Lake. You recall it was 72 strategies summarized to address declining lake levels. Strategy number 9, under the category of coordination, was, quote, create and empower basin councils. Let me just read a short paragraph from our report. Creating basin councils, which is groups of stakeholders in a particular watershed, can help to manage competing demands for water, particularly in times of scarcity. Often such groups operate on a less formal level. The goal in creating basin councils is to optimize and balance competing demands across an entire watershed. A couple of years later, in 2020, the legislature enacted HB 166, the Watershed Councils Act, that recognizes that collaboration solutions developed by diverse stakeholders have historically proven to be an effective means to addressing water needs and developing water policy. So the act authorizes the creation of local basin councils, including a Great Salt Lake Council. In early 2021, the Utah Division of Water Resources contracted with the Langdon Group to implement that legislative directive, and Dan Adams of the Langdon Group is here to tell us how he is doing that. Dan, podium's yours.
All right. Yeah, that is a good question. How the heck are we doing this thing? So, I'm really glad to be with you all today. I think I know some of you, and it's nice to see some friendly faces. And some of you, I've only met you virtually, and so when you come up with a mask, I'm like, who is that person again? So, good to be here and good to meet people in person. I'm going to try to cover a little bit of the overview about what we've been working on since the end of January, and bring us up to where we're at today. Specifically today, what I want to talk about or get us all talking about is your thoughts and ideas about the Great Salt Lake, the local watershed council here. So just as a quick overview, as already has been said, from the 2020 legislative session is when this act was passed. Let me actually jump to this real quick. You guys have probably seen this before, but there are basically 11 local watershed councils that are proposed in the act with this hybrid 12th, which we're here to talk about today, which is the Great Salt Lake Watershed Council. So it's made up of 5 of those local watershed councils. So in my year 1 goals that I've been given are to what's mandated in the act is the creation of the statewide watershed council, and then also to create 2 of the local watershed councils in this year 1, and then over the next 4 years after that to be able to try to get all 12 of the local watershed councils up and running as well. So that's a little bit of the overview of that. I think one of the most important things, I've met now with about 180 people since I started doing all these interviews, and it's been super helpful to meet with folks from all over the state. Kind of the blessing and the curse of COVID is that it would have been great to meet with a lot more people one-on-one, but with COVID, I've been able to meet with actually a lot more people through virtual meetings, and so that's been super helpful actually. But the first question I always get asked is, what is the act? And so what it is and what it is not are super important to understand. So it is not to create a new governing or policy-making or decision-making body. It is not to do that. But it is, as the quote here, is to serve as a forum to encourage and facilitate discussion and collaboration by and amongst stakeholders. So this is all about bringing together diverse people from each of these local watershed councils and who's doing what in those areas, but then also have a conduit for them to come to a statewide watershed council so that all those things can be heard and knowledge shared and collaboration take place. Like I said, I've been doing this since January 28th is when we first started. What's kind of nice for me is I'm originally from Bend, Oregon. And Oregon started their watershed councils in the mid-90s. And so the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council, I was actually on that when it formed. And so now that Utah's been doing this, it's been fun to call back my colleagues back there in Oregon and, okay, what are the lessons learned? If you guys could do it over again, what would you do different or whatever? And so that's been very helpful to tap into that. And then we've also had some great visits with folks in Colorado. They don't call them watershed councils, they call them basin roundtables. But it's been really helpful to also engage with the folks there and see what has been done before and what are their lessons learned. Let's see here. Okay, so just a couple of key things from all these different interviews and some of the lessons learned. One of the first ones, and this is part of what we want to talk about today, is focus. There have been today in Utah, there are some groups that have been meeting for sometimes, in some cases, up to 30 years and call themselves watershed councils. But they usually are very focused on one specific thing, TMDLs or something like that. And the intent of the act is to be able to look at and talk about all the different needs and interests associated with water. But it's really what we've found is that in the other states where they've been successful is when they're very clear about what their areas of focus are. And so that's something we want to discuss. And the other thing too is scalability. When you look at this, this map, as you can see, like if you look at the West Colorado River local watershed, it's gigantic. And the interests of the people on the northern end and what they do radically varies from the people on the Arizona border. And so one of the things that we've been trying to tackle is scalability. Should we form subgroups? How should we help these local watershed councils function? The other thing that is really important is about diversity, and I think there's probably more opportunity with the Great Salt Lake Watershed Council than maybe some of the others, because there already is such a huge diversity of people that are convening and coming together. I have on there limited NGOs in Utah. For me, as a guy coming from the Pacific Northwest, there's an NGO around every corner, tied to endangered species of salmon, bull trout, and steelhead when it comes to water. But Utah, it's a little bit different landscape, but I think one of the important things is that landscape is changing. As our population is growing, as our urban centers are growing, that rural ag, that urban-rural divide is a real thing, and I think we're starting to see some of those changes. But having that diversity is really important. The other thing, too, is expanding what I refer to as the water pie. So often when people initially talk about water, their first thing is to talk about the urban and rural water needs. But we see it like down in Grand County, where all of a sudden Moab is becoming not just a destination for mountain biking and off-road vehicle, but tons of people like to go there to raft and to do different things associated with water. So those, this also kind of becomes something you all know very well. It becomes a struggle over rights. So whether people actually own water rights or they have perceived rights tied to being a citizen of the state, a citizen of the country, and their rights associated with water. So a lot of those things get really complicated when we look at that water pie, and that it is changing. The difference between watershed councils and the Utah Water Task Force. When I started doing this, it was fascinating to realize how many organizations exist in Utah that are doing things with water. And it was funny to talk to other folks, even within agencies, and to say, did you know also within the agencies there's this other group? And they're like, I've never even heard of that other group before. So the part of what's made my job daunting and challenging is that there are so many different organizations doing different things. The other thing is about the complexity of, we have such major trans-basin water systems in Utah. And then the other thing that I heard so much is that if we're going to bring people together to collaborate and to get people having dialogue, it better lead to action. And so that's something I also want to talk to you all a little bit about today too. But because I actually think there's a risk to collaboration and working together. If people just get together and talk today and they never get anything done, I think it actually makes things worse. And so that's part of what we need to think about. How does that relate to the Watershed Council Act? Just really briefly on this, I think one of our challenges here is how do we look at participation and organization? So each one of you that are here today represent an organization or an industry. And this framework kind of applies to all those, especially tied to those that are with government agencies. So this idea that at the top you have the political, the elected officials. So that's our county commissioners, it's the state legislator, it's the governor, it's the president of the United States. They're the elected officials. And then you have the policy level, and that is the folks that implement those policies that elected officials work on and come up with, like this act. This is Carlos Braceras, this is Todd Adams, it's the leaders of the agencies that are implementing those policies. And then we have all the different programs within each one of those organizations, program managers. And then you have the project level, the people that are in the trenches doing the day-to-day work. And then we have the public at large. And that dashed line you see up the side in that is because the public is who elects the political, that top one. And so I think part of our challenge with to effectively do watershed councils is it's to engage all 5 of those levels. And that it's been interesting as I've met with a lot of folks that are at that project level between agencies. A lot of them don't know each other. A lot of them sometimes have different understandings of what the policy is or what their leader's intent is of whatever organization they're with. So that's part of our challenge, is to bring those together. And then this example just talks about how we need to do this horizontally. So we need to make sure that people have the peer-to-peer exchange and dialogue with each other, but also within each one of those organizations. So some of our next steps here is to complete the assessment, complete these interviews I'm doing. And then one of the biggest ones is to determine what do we want to do here with the Great Salt Lake and those 5 watershed councils that come together. At the end of August, we're going to have what we're calling the interim watershed councils planning meeting. So there are a list of folks in the act that are going to appoint or designate or recommend people to be on the statewide watershed council. And so we're going to convene that group and talk about what are those focus areas, what should those things be that council should be looking at. Then we'll actually convene that Utah Watersheds Council, that state watershed council. We'll continue our work in identifying 2 of the 12 to form for local watershed councils, and then we'll work to convene those 2. Okay, so this will kind of frame our discussion a little bit. So in the act, and I don't really want to read this, but, well, maybe I will. Okay, so the second quote there, this is what it says in the act. For each of the 5 watersheds that drain into the Great Salt Lake, the proposed local council includes a person designated by the Great Salt Lake Local Watershed Council, if the Great Salt Lake Local Watershed Council is certified. So each one of these local watershed councils, for it to be formalized and up and running, it has to go through a certification with the statewide watershed council. And so continuing on, and for the Great Salt Lake watershed, the proposed local council includes a person designated by each of the 5 watersheds that drain into the Great Salt Lake that has a certified local watershed council. That's a tongue twister. So basically this idea is that we need to think about how the 5 watershed councils come together for this Great Salt Lake Watershed Council. And then how do you then want to have your representation to the statewide watershed council? Does that make sense? Only Laura's nodding her head, so okay, we got 2 head nods. This is good. Anybody else want to nod their head? Okay, so that's part of what we're trying to tackle. So now I just want to open up for discussion is, how do you all, you've been working together for a long time. What are your thoughts about how do we bring together those 5, representation from the 5 other local watershed councils, and I'll pop to that map. And then how do you want to function, or how do you think the Great Salt Lake Watershed Council should function? That's a super loaded question, so anybody want to be brave and offer some thoughts? Yeah.
So I know the authors of that legislation were trying to make sure that they didn't undermine and that at the same time they would leverage existing watershed councils. Some of them, such as this one, have long-standing relationships, but to make sure that nothing happens in a void. I'll throw out one straw, item for consideration. Maybe it's for those that are geographically located from this council, you find a place on the West Desert, the Bear River, the Weber, the Jordan, and Utah Lake. Sorry. That was the concept that they wanted to take care of the state, recognize the significance of the Great Salt Lake as a body, but kind of too unwieldy to make it one council, and at the same time recognize this body was, I think, part of that. I think, Tim, you were maybe involved with some of that. I don't know if there's any more to add to the vision at the legislative level.
Yeah, it's good to have Tim and Candace here because they can both set me straight too. What are your other thoughts about, I guess, just poke holes in it as you look at the formation of the Great Salt Lake Local Watershed Council? Is it taking this group that already exists and is it morphing into that? Is it creating yet another organization? I think that's one of the challenges for all the local watershed councils is, in some cases, there are some existing groups that have called me up and said, hey, we think we're a candidate that we could just roll right into being a watershed council. And then others are saying, you know what, we don't want to be tied to, we want to participate in watershed council, but we think we should be separate. So there's this kind of practicality of, all of you can only go to so many meetings and do so much. And so we want watershed councils not just to be yet another meeting that everybody goes to. We want it to be that it adds value and it's a good use of your time and it's bringing together all these collaborative thoughts and ideas. So what are your thoughts about its formation? Yeah, Ann?
One of the things this council, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we don't have Bear River necessarily represented as far as Upper Bear. So I think they would have, that particular basin would have heartburn not being involved with, not being involved with this particular council. So that would need to be resolved.
Okay. And is your thought that somebody from that Bear River area would sit on this board? Or
No, but if we were going to have one person representing, from each area, we've had representation from Weber and Jordan and Utah Lake and more or less the West Desert. Am I misspeaking? Maybe. And they haven't been part of the Great Salt Lake conversation at Bear River as much. And so it would just, that would be, we need to be aware that they need to be caught up on Great Salt Lake.
We do have Box Elder County.
Yes, but we don't have Cache or Rich.
Gotcha. Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, with Leland's thought, if you look at it as counties from the Bear River, you have one of the 3 counties there that are participating. And that sentiment has actually come up quite a bit because there is kind of this challenge of watershed, but also then breaking it out by county. And that's part of the reason I shared that kind of 5-piece framework is I think it's important to have the local government involved, whether it's a municipality or the counties. So we need to figure out how to do that too. What are your other thoughts? Yeah.
So I think it's sort of in organizational development. I would think that it makes sense to establish what the goals and objectives are for each of the various organizations. And sometimes that tends to, as you develop those, that tends to identify who their rightful, who the appropriate representatives are. So especially because I think you do have the opportunity to sort of mesh and create confusion between the advisory council and the watershed council. So to me, it would be starting at the end and working backwards of what are you wanting to achieve, or what are the objectives you're trying to achieve, and how are they distinct and different from the council here. And that sort of tends to see what are the skills and expertise you need to serve on each of those 2 councils, and that sort of tends to bring to the top the names of people that should serve and how it should be structured.
Yeah, that's a great point. my graduate degree is in organizational behavior, so we're shout out there, right? Yeah.
I think one of the challenges you face, as Dana said, is defining the objective of each, but defining what balance is on each council if you're going to create two. There was a lot of thought went into the development of this council in terms of balance as to who would be represented, and then once we went through the entire analysis and how to make that balance good, we went to the legislature and they changed it. You know, there is both the, if a watershed council has a political component, that means there's a different kind of balance than if it's only a technical or it's a water user component. Water users tend to believe that they have the responsibility and control for all, but they ignore the public side of that equation, the right of the public to have a say in what happens. Even though a water right exists, we're still talking about water for the greater good. Yeah. And so how you strike that balance and not create a group that's 437 people, I think is really a challenge. Because there are a lot of people involved in the water equation who don't necessarily sit at the table when you talk about water rights only.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that has to be taken into account. I don't know how you do that yet.
Yeah.
And relative to whether you have two groups, the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council as well as a Great Salt Lake Watershed Council, I think it really depends on the outcomes you're trying to achieve. This group has more of an advocacy role for Great Salt Lake with not taking into account how we're going to attack the water right issue. Explaining that if we don't do that, if we don't find ways around attacking or utilizing water more efficiently, then the lake suffers. Ours has been primarily an advocacy role. And I don't know how you're going to change that into and add to it the water users who have a vested interest in not allowing water to make it to the Great Salt Lake.
Right.
You know, and so those groups have to come together, but how you balance that is really critical. And I don't know how you're going to really effectively do that without throwing somebody out or stepping on somebody's toes.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah. That's. Everybody like Leland that's been involved in water for a really long time in the state, that's their closing comment to me every time is, good luck. So,
How many seats do you anticipate there are in the Great Salt Lake Watershed Council?
how many seats, you know, so it actually, so for each, I'd encourage you all to go look at the act. If you just Google Utah Watershed Council Act, it's the first thing that pops up every time. And it's actually pretty abbreviated and quite easy to read through. But for the statewide, or for the Utah Watersheds Council, which is the statewide watershed council, and for each of the local watershed councils, it's really pretty prescriptive about who, like the recommendations about who should be on each of these watershed councils. For the local watershed councils, there is more flexibility because each one of the 12 are so different, they are so unique. And so there, it leaves it open for there to be that balance of representation. And so it's not set on how many people can be on it or not. Tim, anything you want to add to that? Did I capture that correctly? It's basically designed to be flexible and adaptable by Watershed Council. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, sorry. I was just going to say, it is deliberately not fixed because local needs will determine what it looks like. And I think we tend to get hang up a little bit on structure and thinking about, well, geez, my interest has got to be represented, or at it. But I think it is important to remember, it's just a stakeholder group at the end of the day. It does not have rulemaking authority, and it's really just designed to sort of vet the issues that are there at the local level. And we've got this shared resource that touches all these watersheds. So, that's really what the end goal is, and exactly what it looks like isn't so important. I think with the state level, we realized there was a political dimension to it, and so that's why there was so carefully said, this is who's going to be on it. Below that, though, it really is left up to local needs. We all know, this group knows, you get too big, it's unwieldy. You get too small, it's not representative, and then people start to get upset on that end.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Does that help answer that? I couldn't tell who asked that question. Okay, yep. Do you have any other thoughts, or let me just ask one more question. I'm curious what you all think if you already have this existing group that's meeting here today, and you also had this Great Salt Lake Watershed Council, what do you think it should be focused on then? Because kind of like we were talking about, Leland, that this is kind of an advocacy-based kind of group. What do you think would be a helpful focus for a watershed council that would be of benefit to what you're trying to do, but also of benefit to the resource in the area? Any thoughts on that? And maybe I'll prime the pump a little bit. Like the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council that I was on, they do not focus on water rights. They only focus on three things, which is monitoring, restoration, and education. So that's kind of a common thing you see through all these successful watershed councils. They're very clearly focused on what they are and what they are not. So any thoughts about what do you think would be a helpful focus for a watershed council here? Yeah.
Thank you. I think some of the problem that I see is sometimes you have too many developers that want to guide projects through, and it gives me heartburn. It's okay if they use somebody else's water because they have this ground. And the water rights, pretty important.
Yeah, there's nothing that says that there couldn't be an element of water rights that is discussed here just because the other states around us don't do it. But I think, yeah, that part about water rights, it was interesting, my interview with Utah Division of Water Rights, and to talk about what they are focused on and what they're not focused on. They're very clear and articulate about that. So I think finding out what is helpful and where should watershed councils focus and where should they not focus tied to that. But I think you're right, that balance of, that comment has come up a number of times in the interviews I've done about developers. And then sometimes that it's also balanced by a comment about agriculture. So it's, yeah, that part about making sure we've got a balanced representation. It's not, predominantly from one place, like developers or whatever it might be, so.
And I hate to interrupt here, but I just noticed we're well past time here.
Okay.
We need to try and wrap this up and take it offline, if that's okay.
Yeah, you betcha. I'll just offer, if anybody would like to visit with me and hop on a call or meet in person, I'm happy to do that if you have additional questions. The last thing I want is for anybody to leave here with an outstanding question in their mind, and so please reach out, and I can leave a couple of my cards on the table over here if that's helpful.
That'd be great.
All right, thanks.
Thank you very much. Tom?
Can I ask maybe to just offer up one thought? As you look at that map there, this group here has various interests from a perspective of a particular passion or part of the ecosystem or mineral extraction, some sort of venue. We don't have a geographic distribution of the membership of this council. And one thing that I saw in the development of this act is the lake is influenced by the water that flows out of the Bear, the Weber, the Jordan, the Utah Lake, and the West Desert. And really, we can't do anything if we don't have water. So I would encourage you to see how this act and the formation of these watershed councils allows this group to interact in the upper basins and inform them so that policy decisions incorporate things that are influenced down at the lake, but then we're in a bubble here. And then the other way around is the things that we might seek to propose to do at the lake level. How does that help or impact those at the upper basin? Maybe for a future opportunity, I'd like to hear from, Candace or Todd, how they see this helping us solve some problems. Back to your earlier point, I don't want to spend a lot of time waving hands and not accomplishing anything new that we aren't already doing, so.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Laura Haskell, there you are. Let's move to our next topic. In case you're not aware, we're experiencing an extreme drought throughout Utah. And at our last meeting, you requested that we have a drought update, and Laura Haskell agreed to come and provide that for us today. And I'm sorry we're pinching you on time a little bit, Laura, but I look forward to hearing your presentation. Yes.
While they're changing hands here for just a sec, I'm
Welcome.
Commissioner Laureen Kamalu from Davis County, and we just got back from DC last night as commissioners. Randy Elliott had another conference to go to, so I'm here for him, but also I'm here because this is a topic that I also love and have followed quite a bit as a resident of this county since '96. So thank you, and happy to help however I can.
Thank you very much. Welcome to our group, and look forward to your continuing participation. Commissioner, thank you. Laura.
My name is Laura Haskell. I'm with the Division of Water Resources, and there I do a lot of the drought coordination for the division. So I can actually cut down my presentation quite a bit because I wanted to ask this group at the end, I wanted to have you think about this question and at the end ask some key points, but you have this handy flyer here that apparently you already gave to our division, and it didn't trickle down to me yet. So I will ask if there's anything else additional at the end, but that should address a lot of that. So monitoring conditions, that's a lot of what we do at Water Resources is we monitor the water conditions, and we work with other agencies, other state agencies and other federal agencies to monitor conditions on an ongoing basis, and that we want to continue doing that whether we're in a drought or whether we're not in a drought. So we were monitoring the conditions, and in the spring we did notice that there was some dryness developing, some moderate drought starting to come, and then we had this record dry and very hot summer, and drought just exploded over the summer. So that when we started the water year, we were in this situation where we had the extreme drought, which is the kind of the bright red, and then the exceptional drought, which is the dark red and the worst category of drought. And I think most of you are familiar with these maps, and as we go through a lot of mapping related to drought and conditions, there's this same color scheme where yellow is more mild, and then unfortunately we're seeing a lot of these reds. So now this is the current map that the U.S. Drought Monitor drought map, and 98% of the state is in this extreme drought or exceptional drought. And this water year, we have NRCS has some stations, there's SNOTEL stations and there's SCAN stations. And the precipitation, we would typically see about 27 inches from the start of the water year on October 1st until about the beginning of July, we'd see about 27 inches of precipitation. This year, we've seen only about 17 inches. So we have this 10-inch deficit when we started the water year already in a drought. And so we were in a hole, and then now we're not gaining as fast as we would hope to. So we're getting in a worse situation almost daily. We do weekly reporting on drought conditions, a joint report between the Division of Water Resources and the Division of Water Rights. This graph is one of the things that we put in that report, and this is using USGS stream gauges, and we've selected 28 gauges around the state that are more representative of natural conditions. They're typically above reservoirs so that we don't have them skewed by what the reservoir is releasing. And on this chart, so it's 30 years of data, and the blue line is what is the median or typical. The gold line is the minimum for any particular day in that 30-year period. And then the black line is the water year now. And you can see that the black line is almost on top of that gold line. And, the different volumes, the volume of water in blue that would be typical, and then the volume of water in black that we are seeing right now, which is the minimum there. So if we look at those same 28 stream flow streams, but turn it into a volume of water, you can see how much difference in volume there is between what's typical and what we are having now. And you can also see that volume of water, our current year in black, has gone below any minimum that we've seen in this 30-year period. We're lower than any of those. So typically 0.76 million acre feet of volume of water that we'd receive from these streams, and right now we're at 0.4 million acre feet, so roughly half of volume of water. So this condition is quite serious, and we are trying, that is part of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to really convey to people that this is a serious situation. It is not just one of these periods of dry or wet that we typically have. It's a different situation than we've seen before. Looking down a little bit closer into this area, that we're concerned about, the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center does some water supply forecasts. And they have the legend on the side. It's a little bit small, but the pink that you're seeing a lot of on this map is anything that's below 30% of the water supply and of the average. And so there's a lot of pink on there. There's a little bit of the red, which is in the 30% to 50%, or 30% to 50% of average. And then there's some other colors, but we don't really need to worry about those because unfortunately they don't even show up on the map much. So yeah, they have this whole scale, and we're only mostly in those two smallest categories for this area that we're looking at. So I talked about the precipitation for this water year. If we look at it by basin, and looking at the Great Salt Lake Basin and some other areas, you can see that the Great Salt Lake Basin didn't really do a lot better or a lot worse than other areas. The whole state is mostly in that 50 to 70% range, with some areas a little bit closer to 50, some areas a little closer to 70, but really that was what the whole state did. It's a very widespread condition where the whole state is in this in the same boat of having struggles with water and with drought. So what we're focusing on with this is educating people. We're trying to get people to understand that this is an extreme drought and we need people to take extreme action. We put out a weekly lawn watering guide that we've put out for years, and we've actually switched that this year to a drought lawn watering guide. And we're saying water to survive so your lawn doesn't die, but don't water to thrive. We want people to have yellow lawns this year. 60% of residential water use is outdoor water use. So there's a lot of potential there to save. And we have this Slow the Flow website that has a lot of tips. It has a link to that lawn watering guide, and it has a lot of tips that are very, very useful because I think this group here, we all understand the situation. We all know how our actions affect the environment, and we all want a healthy Great Salt Lake. And so this has little quick tips, and it talks about what things that people can do that are usually pretty simple. It talks about why you should do them and the effect that it'll have. And they're in nice little easy to digest chunks so that you can share those with others, you can share them with neighbors, you can send people here, and it's not too technical, it's not too overwhelming. This site is really geared towards the public and people who are at a basic level that don't understand this whole system of the Great Salt Lake like many of you do. So if you want more information, there is that slowtheflow.org that has the water saving tips and the link to the lawn watering guide that you can direct the public to or whoever. There's also drought.utah.gov, and that is where the weekly drought reports are that we put out that give an update each week on the drought conditions and where we're at. This is something that we put out on our social media. As you were saying, a lot of people have picked up on these water levels from the Great Salt Lake because it is an issue. It's an important issue to everyone in the state. And it's very visual how you can see how the lake levels have changed over time and how low they are right now. And so it's eye-catching and catches people's attention. We have a Facebook account and an Instagram account that we've put this out on to help raise people's awareness, because it is going to take all of us taking action to mitigate these conditions. We can't make more water. I mean, we have the water we have available. We can't change the conditions there and create more water, but we can just make what we have last as long as possible and be as careful with that as possible. So I kind of brought it back to my original question here. I will add, I think this is a pretty good thing. If there's anything you guys want to add that people don't, that you'd like to know, or I don't know if that covers it all. Just key points, because sometimes we do have the opportunity to do presentations like this or the media where we're interacting with the public and get points out to them about the Great Salt Lake.
Maybe we'll take that question and shoot it out by email and gather up some responses for you, Laura.
All right.
Ann has a quick question.
Yes.
I don't envy you, your job. You're doing a great job. I've been on a couple of these calls, but the map, the last visual that you had that you put on, if you could adjust the maps of your drought, because it makes it look like Great Salt Lake is full. And I know it's just an outline, but it really matters. People really look at that and say, well, Great Salt Lake is doing fine. And the weather people do the same thing, right? But if you actually just could superimpose the real level of the lake as opposed to the outline of the lake, or just do the outline instead of having it be full of blue, I think that would trigger a lot more thought about the level of the lake.
That is a very good point, and I can reach out and see if we can do something about it.
I obviously don't have to fix everything, but just if you could.
No, that's a good point, because it is helping people to understand what the situation is and helping with that awareness. So if there are any questions, my email is on here, or if you just email drought@utah.gov, I will get that as well.
Hey, Laura, just really quick, could you talk about is it the biweekly meetings that you have with all the presentations with the USGS? And if people are interested from the council, could they join that?
Yes, we do have, so that monitoring, we will put up we have a biweekly webinar right now that is a lot of information about stream flows and Great Salt Lake levels and reservoir levels, weather. It has the weather forecasts. There are a lot of federal partners on there that come and present to that. They're running about an hour now. They used to be a little bit shorter, but with everything going on, they are running a little longer. And if you want to sign up for those, just send an email to the drought@utah.gov and ask to join the drought webinars. And you can just say drought webinars and we'll know what you mean. So, thanks.
Thank you very much, Laura. Appreciate that. Do you have any good news?
It's a little hard to come by good news right now.
Light at the end of the tunnel, it's cyclical. 25 years after the last record low, we hit a record high.
I did notice that the temperatures, although we had the really, really high temperatures over the month of June, the evaporative demand was not comparatively high. It was a little bit lower, so I don't know if that was due to cloud cover or humidity, but the evaporative demand was not as high as the high temperatures were, so that's good news, I guess.
Yeah, there always is, right? Okay, thank you very much. John, come on up and get ready, and I'll give a brief introduction. Our 2017 strategy document, one of the 72 strategies, was that we needed to have municipalities implement best management practices for water planning and set landscaping and water use standards for land use. The HCR 10 group had a strategic opportunity entitled Ensure that Water Planning Informs Land Use Decisions. So the Advisory Council provided some seed money to start the process of determining how to integrate water and land use planning at the local level. And that's phase one that John is going to report on today. The legislature also appropriated an additional $270,000 over several years to take this and expand it and provide more tools and information and help to local governments. So John Berggren is here with Western Resource Advocates, which is partnered with the Babbitt Center to perform this work. And John, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to the council for having me. So my name is John Berggren. I'm with Western Resource Advocates. We're a NGO working around the West on a variety of energy, land, and water issues. I'm on our water team. And as mentioned, we did partner with the Babbitt Center for Land and Water Policy. They're based out of Arizona, and they're an initiative of the Lincoln Center for Land Policy, which has been around for about 75 years. In between the two organizations, the Babbitt Center has been around for 4 years, dedicated to helping communities integrate water and land use planning. And WRA, Western Resource Advocates, we've been working on this topic for about 7 years, helping communities integrate water and land use planning. So I thought I'd take a quick step back. As mentioned, this has been identified as an important point by the state for communities to better integrate their water and land use planning. But it's a relatively new topic, and so I think it's important to think about why integrate your water and land use planning to begin with. And there's a bunch of different reasons. I'm just going to kind of high level why this topic is important. Historically, these two processes have been siloed. So you have your land use planning happening in one way, your water planning happening in another way. Very little integration, very little discussion among those two different processes. So you get your development happening, they ask for the water provider provides that water. This leads to some inefficiencies if you're not integrating those processes. But importantly, if you do integrate those two processes, it allows communities in any way they think is best for them, because land use planning is a local decision-making process. If you integrate those, if you bring water conservation, water efficiency into the land use planning process, it allows communities to grow, but do it in a way that works for them in terms of water efficiency. And so just bringing water to the discussion from the beginning can really help improve efficiencies at that community's direction. And there's a whole host of different opportunities and ways for you to integrate your water and land use planning, all the way from your high-level general plan down to through your zoning, your ordinances, regulations, post-occupancy enforcements. We actually have an entire 300-page guidebook on how to do this. So there's a whole different ways to do it. And like I said, because land use planning comes at the local jurisdiction, it's up to that community to decide how they want to integrate their land use planning with water efficiency. So as mentioned, we were tasked with this phase one of this larger effort by the state to help communities integrate their water and land use planning. I'm just going to quickly go over what we have done, WRA in partnership with the Babbitt Center over the last few months. And basically what this phase one was we developed what we're calling a framework for community action. It's basically a toolkit that we put together that allows communities to begin this process. We have a whole kind of stepwise tool of thinking through where are we now, where do we want to be, and how do we get there. And so this schematic on the right, just after developing our project plan that we started in early May of this year, went through, developed this framework, developed this toolkit, and all associated best practices, materials, and other related important supporting materials. Conducted some interviews with organizations in communities, mainly around northern Utah, to solicit feedback on this draft framework. We wanted to make sure that what we were developing was actually going to be useful. So we conducted several interviews with organizations and communities in northern Utah. And then finally, a part of this phase one was queuing up potential workshops for phase two. So one idea is in this larger phase two effort is to develop these trainings or workshops that bring communities together, to bring land use planners, water providers, and other relevant actors together, help them understand how they can better integrate their water land use planning. And so in conducting these interviews, we solicited expressions of interest in that type of training or that type of workshop, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So this framework for community action or toolkit that we developed, there's 4 parts to it. First part is we help you think through who needs to be at the table, who needs to be involved. We're calling this, you can form a water and land use planning team, but really this is just identifying which key actors, which key stakeholders need to be part of this conversation. It's not just the water providers or public works or retail providers. It's not just the land use planners, but thinking through the whole host of folks that you need to bring to the table. Elected officials, parks and recs departments, engineering departments, your water conservancy district, your retail water providers, thinking through who needs to be part of this conversation. So we provide a whole list of potential stakeholders that you could include, and you can go through and see for your community who is most important to bring to that table. So stage 1 kind of figures out who needs to be part of this conversation. Stage 2 is kind of an internal look of where things stand for your community when it comes to water planning and land use planning. We developed what's called a community self-assessment, which I'll go into more detail here in a sec, but just know that that's part of the second stage of this 4-stage process. So after looking internally about where things are currently and what you're currently doing with your water land use planning, you can identify local points of impact. So this is basically how you want to integrate your water and land use planning. Is it at the planning and policy making level? Is it something with your pre-development or your development review? Is it in terms of building and construction codes or ordinances or regulations? Is it something you want to do once the development's in place? So we help you step through all the different points throughout the entire development process of where you can actually begin to make interventions and think about including water into that development process. And then finally, stage 4, we help identify any resources needed to get you moving with this effort. You provide action plan documents and thinking through how we're actually going to get this off the ground and get it implemented. You know, thinking through if the state moves forward with these types of workshops, applying for one of those, and then also considering any policy updates. So if you're updating your general plan in the next few years, you're updating your water conservation plan or water master plan, hopefully this whole framework helps you think through exactly what could go into the update and how to better improve efficiency with the development process. So this is the framework that we developed, again, the 4 stages. I wanted to spend some time on that stage 2, that community self-assessment, just for a few minutes. So what we did is we developed, it's an online form, and it's basically a checklist to help think through all components of both your water and your land use planning and what you're currently doing, and then also what are some opportunities for updating some of those specific components of your current water supply or your current water planning and land use planning. So like I said, this is online toolkit broken into 4 parts you see there on the left, and each part probably would be filled out or entered by a different agency or organization within your community. So the water supply and demand trends, that's probably economic development, that's population projections, that's what type of growth you're seeing. Is it mostly new development? Is it mostly infill? Is it redevelopment? Really making sure everyone's on the same page in terms of what you're expecting to see with your water and growth. Part 2 is your current water supply and demand, probably filled out by your public works, your water provider, or in coordination with your retail water provider. Really looking at what are your current supplies, what are your current demands, what do those numbers look like, and any projections going forward so that everyone's kind of on the same page with your water supply and demand. Part 3 is looking at your existing water conservation and efficiency programs. So again, this is probably filled out by your water provider or water providers. What programs are you currently doing? So we have a whole list of programs you can look through and see any of those that you are currently doing. Part 4 is really getting into the land use planning side of things. So this would probably be filled out by community development or planners or whatever organization within a community has that land use planning authority. And this is just questions about what's in your general plan, what is in your development code, what is in your indoor plumbing standards, what is in your outdoor regulations. Just again, helping folks think through what they're currently doing and then seeing what the options are that you might be able to do with your community. With each of those parts, we do provide some best practices, some case studies, some example policies, and some guiding principles. So again, it's not designed, this whole community self-assessment is not designed to say, hey, you got 9 out of 10, you're doing great. It's more, here's a laundry list of opportunities. Here, you identify what you might be doing or not. If you're interested, we provide all these resources that you can click on, learn more, see example regulations, see example general plans, and really learn best practices so that as you move forward to those other stages, you have a better, clear idea of what you might be able to do. So just wanted to show kind of what this looks like. I've been talking about this framework. This is just a screenshot from one part. This is that part 4, the land use planning side, and this is just what it looks like. Again, so a list of questions. In this case, it's your general plan and what's currently in your general plan. And you can, kind of check off yes or no what you have included. If you want to include a link to where that general plan is located. And then on this far right, those are some of those resources. So if you don't have a water quality protection or water source protection component of your general plan, you can click on the resources and see what that might look like or see some best practices. So if you are updating your general plan, you have some idea of where you want to go with that. I'll say the other goal of this is not just to get a snapshot of where you are and then look at resources of where you could be going, but really to get the whole community on the same page. So again, this whole framework filled out by planning agencies, planning departments, water providers, water retailers, water districts, helps everyone begin to understand where we are so that as we move to integrate water and land use planning, as we continue to grow, everyone's on the same page and we have a good idea of what we're currently doing and where we can be going. So this framework helps communities provide that in a clear and provide all this information in one place so that everyone in the community is on the same page moving forward. So as I mentioned, we did conduct several interviews with draft versions of this framework to get a, is this useful? How can we change it? How can we update it to make it more useful? And so we did reach out to we did talk to 12 communities and organizations across mainly northern Utah, mostly cities and towns, but also, Utah League of Cities and Towns, Jordan Valley, and a few other folks, and really just asked them, kind of provided the draft framework and really walk through, is this type of thing useful? Why or why not? How can we change it? How can we modify it? And what is needed to help you better integrate your water and land use planning? And some of the key findings from those interviews, kind of at a high level, what we heard is there's limited water and land use integration happening currently, but a strong interest in learning more. So a lot of the folks we talked to said, yeah, we're not totally integrating our water and land use planning, but we know it's important. We know we want to think about better ways to do that. And so that was encouraging to see that most folks are really interested in learning more. We did get pretty positive feedback on this framework that we developed, including that self-assessment, that document that you kind of walk through and fill out, which was encouraging and good. However, a lot of folks said, yeah, but I don't know how we'd actually use that without some sort of external support or some sort of external incentive for actually going through this process and using this framework. So if it's something like funding, you get access to the pot of funding if you go through this process, or you get access to trainings or workshops if you go through this process. That was one thing that we heard from several of the communities that we talked to. And then across the board, we did hear strong interest in some sort of workshop training, multi-stakeholder workshops, so bringing a bunch of communities together and helping them walk through this whole process. So again, that strong interest in learning more about how to better integrate your water and land use planning, we heard kind of across the board. Just want to quickly acknowledge that the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, thank you very much for the funding and support for this phase 1. And then we had a pretty hardworking project team that really helped us develop this in a productive way, and we had lots of conversations and back and forth. So Laura and Candace, Rachel Shilton and Marcel, thank you so much for your support. There is the Water and Land Use Planning Stakeholder Committee, the larger group of folks that we got to talk to a couple times, again providing a lot of great feedback. And then in the 12 communities or organizations that we talked to, some of who are here in the room, we just want to thank you for your thoughts and comments on the framework. So looking forward, as was mentioned, the state has this larger phase 2 initiative, and WRA and Babbitt, we're excited to maybe be involved in that, and we, as organizations, are greatly interested in helping Utah communities do this process, integrate their water and land use planning. So what that exactly looks like, it's a little unclear, but just to say that we're excited about this opportunity and the work to date and moving forward, helping out as best we can. I'll leave our contact information. I'll also leave a few of my business cards on the table. Happy to chat about any of this, the framework, what we did, and then water and land use planning more broadly. Like I said, we have a lot of experience with this topic. We have all sorts of resources, guidebooks, and lots of experience. So if you have any questions, you want to chat about this, I'm always happy to talk. And I'm not sure if I have time for questions now, but I'd be happy to take any.
Lorraine?
My undergrad's human resources with a lot of organizational behavior, but I served for 4.5 years on a planning commission in my city here in Kaysville. And so here is something where I can maybe connect a couple things as a county commissioner and what's going on in 15 cities in Davis County. Every month there is a Council of Governments meeting that is held with all the mayors. We also have close relationships with the city managers and the city councils. And everything that you just presented are things that I have observed in my service since 2014 in the local planning commission. And so yes, I have not heard one conversation in cities or at the county except about water and land use planning efforts, and it makes all the sense in the world. But I do think they're very ripe for it and very interested in it. In the May Council of Governments meeting, there was actually a joint resolution with all 15 cities to work on water conservation. And so everyone sees it, wants it, interested in it. And so I think that this could really be something that helps in Davis County and no doubt other jurisdictions all over. So we could help with a presentation at another Council of Governments meeting, So anyway, just wanted to say that these discussions go on, but there's so much opportunity to move in this direction for new development and even existing development. Davis County 3 years ago, and so this was actually before Bob and I were commissioners, but the county saw a need to do something better with water and invested in a smart water system that measures not only watering based on weather, but also moisture content of the soil, and has had it on the lowest possible level for years. So anyway, a great interest, I think, and an education in how to work with the cities and the planning commissions moving forward, I think could be very productive in Davis County.
Thank you, Commissioner. I assume, John, you'll take that and run with it.
Yes. Yeah, that's great to hear, and we're happy to help facilitate these conversations, present resources, present materials, anything that we can do to further that conversation. We heard that across the board, like people are interested, and now's the time. We saw the drought status. This is a long-term, hopefully long-term solution to these problems that we're seeing on the ground, so I'd be happy to have that conversation with you.
Joe?
Hi. In the checklist that you're suggesting, is there an element of protecting recharge areas, so you're not placing impervious surfaces on current recharge areas, from a land use planning perspective? Because that's important as well.
Yeah, and so I'm pretty sure we do, but it's a pretty comprehensive list of what's in there. But this is the type of thing that it's an iterative process. It's a living document. And if we hear things like that are specifically important, we could add them to that checklist if they're not already in there. So that's great to hear. I think we have a couple line items about that, but if not, I think this is not a static document. We can always add to it. So it's great to hear that.
Great, thanks, Joe. Dina had a note, and then Tom.
So John, have you presented this information to the Wasatch Front Regional Council, the Regional Growth Committee, I would strongly recommend you do. Salt Lake County, we're heavily involved with projects with regional, Wasatch Front Regional Council. In fact, we chair PlanTAC, which is all of the planning directors that come together. I have a meeting just later this week. In addition to that, we also host the Association of Municipal Councils, which unlike COG, which is the mayors, the Association of Municipal Councils is all the council members. So we just had that meeting yesterday, and I know they're very eager to get information like this as well. In addition to that, you know, one thing that this council should consider, or maybe we talked to Wasatch Front Regional Council about it, is that SB 34 several years ago tied transportation funding to moderate income housing plans are required, and if you don't submit them, either that or changing state legislation to require this kind of analysis for general plans is probably something we should be considering. I mean, if we don't seize the moment, we're foolish in terms of what we can achieve for the future. So those are all things that we would like to think about. And in addition to that, I know in Salt Lake County and probably in many other jurisdictions that are receiving an ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act allocation, we're going to be looking at what kind of funding is available for this type of thing, because we're incorporating this and spent quite a bit of time talking to Marcel and others in developing our West General Plan, which is the unincorporated area of West Salt Lake County, and trying to incorporate more of this into that plan as well. So I really look forward to an opportunity to chat with you after and see what other kinds of engagement we can have and partnerships we can have at Salt Lake County.
Thank you, Dina.
Thank
Tom,
you.
the final brief word.
Thank you. John, we spoke a little bit. Three things that I would offer would be, you know, having worked in municipal government for over 30 years and seeing where we're at today, I'll share a couple things. Randy Julender and Brian McInerney, you know, formerly the people who addressed the state and said, here's what water looks like this year. They both made the comment that Utah should look at Arizona and say, that's what we're going to look like from a water perspective if the droughts continue. And so any infrastructure and land use planning that we say in terms of green turf today, if it's going to be dried up and need to be ripped out in 20 years, the smart thing to do is to adopt something now. So that second piece would be this. I think it'd be really instrumental. What has helped us at Sandy City understand the decisions today versus the cost of those decisions in the future. Our petition of just 2,500 acre feet from the Central Utah project is going to cost the city $34 to $50 million. The city's budget is $50 million, not just the water department. If we adopt land use planning and conservation practices now and invest now, that $34 million gets wiped away of buying a resource, a limited resource, and that money gets invested into hardscapes, things that doesn't have to get ripped out in the future. So we're going to start looking, if we start looking like Tucson and Phoenix earlier, or Las Vegas, no one wants to be like Las Vegas, maybe pick St. George. But if we put our head in the sand, we're going to go down the road where we're going to need to do that in the future. It's just we haven't turned the corner. We haven't had our wake-up moment in Utah like many other states have. And so the cities that do that sooner will be in a position like Sandy right now. We believe we'll be able to abate and not purchase that $50 million of water by continuing our conservation efforts, but our land use planning has to do that. So I would incorporate those. You know, if you're sitting at a planning commission or a city council, why should I do this when my developers say it's going to cost me more on the front side? I'm sorry, Don. And I think, you know, having a roadmap that shows the cost of water with this land, you know, the water you need if you choose this landscape is going to cost, and I can give you the Sandy example, $34 to $50 million. If we adopt these new land use and landscaping practices and make it stick, what is our cost? I think that helps the policy making out of a 2 to 4 year election cycle and lets them at least see at the political and the public level what it looks like over a 30-year term. Otherwise, we're going to be like the lobster and just get kind of baked, you know, turn up the temperature slowly and then have to climb out of the pot. Or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate those comments. John, thank you very much for being here with us today. Let's move to the next agenda item. That's the project funding recommendation for fiscal year 2021-2022. As you know, several years ago, we were able to shift $125,000 from brine shrimp royalties into the reclamation fund. Is that what it's called? Anyway, allocated for our use in studies. At that time, we established a committee to make recommendations to the council, Leland volunteered, I volunteered, Laura volunteered, and Jim Harris's predecessor volunteered, so in essence he volunteered. And we have a variety of criteria we use in looking at proposals. Principally, we're looking to inform the debate, fill in the gaps, answer key questions. As Leland mentioned, support our messages, some advocacy. We're looking to leverage our funding where possible. We do some limited data collection, but we're not really focused on hardcore R&D and data, and there's some other factors. At our last meeting, we announced the June 15 deadline for submission of proposals. We received 4. Council members received a fairly detailed memo on those 4 and a recommendation. We're recommending that we allocate $50,000 to give us a greater understanding of lake effect snow as it relates not only to the ski industry but to public water supply and historic water right production along the Wasatch Front. This would be in support of our message regarding low lake levels as well as the importance of lake effect snow in those areas. Secondly, at our last meeting, Joe Havasey raised an issue about availability of water supply data. And as a result of that, a group has been meeting and has come up with a recommendation that we establish a Great Salt Lake Watershed dashboard and an interactive mapper. They've spent a lot of time, made a lot of effort, and good progress. That would require $55,000 from us and a partial match from USGS, which has agreed to do so. The third project is discharge monitoring at the new breach, which is a $20,000 request. Monitoring water and salt balance at the new breach, and I mean by that the breach was put in place in 2016, has been continuous by USGS, but their funding agreement with DEQ expires this September. It's really a bad time for that monitoring to stop with low lake levels, and so we're recommending that we spend the $20,000 matched by Division of Water Resources and USGS to keep that going and hopefully look for a longer term funding solution that doesn't require our funds. The fourth proposal that we did not recommend as a priority but would recommend that it be held back as an alternative if any of the first 3 fail is an expansion of a project that was developed by a hot topic grant by a Great Salt Lake technical team to develop a model regarding the bidirectional flow at the new breach. And that project will produce a model. The Utah State University professor who's responsible for that would like to expand that model and do more work and ask for $75,000. That $75,000 request was not approved by the Great Salt Lake technical team hot topics this year. And again, we put that in our 4th place. So those are our recommendations from the committee standpoint. I can go into more detail if you'd like, but our recommendation is unanimous that we approve those first 3 for funding and hold the 4th one as an alternate. Any questions or discussion or debate? Comments? Thank you, Dan. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Leland. Is there any debate or discussion?
Don, the only question I had is, has anyone had an opportunity to maybe talk with the ski resorts? Perhaps their willingness to contribute to the study, the first one that's on the priority list? Or at least talk to them and let them know what's happening. I don't know if there's been any outreach to the ski resorts or Ski Utah to let them know what's happening. Okay, I just think that would be smart to let them know what's going on.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? I'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? So that's also unanimous. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, we always have a public comment period. Allow some time for the public to make comments. I'd like to see by raise of hand if there's anyone who'd like to do so at this meeting. Anyone else? Thank you, Craig. Take a couple of minutes. That'd be great. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned that the Utah State University proposal was for expanding their project. Actually, it was for completing it. We don't really have anything that we can use quite yet. So if you were to look at the UPRR study of the Great Salt Lake and what the salinity should be today, they predicted that it would be at toxic levels and should be crashing the brine shrimp population. But actually, it's not so bad. It's like 14% perhaps. And the reason why they missed that is because the way they looked at salinity has some flaws. And one of those flaws is the two-way flow through the causeway breaches. And that analysis, that algorithm that we use, we have recognized that it's been flawed for years, and we've been looking for some way of replacing it. Right now, we're getting below the salinity ranges that the UPRR said should be followed, and maybe the salinity committee is moving towards ignoring that. But if we want to adjust that causeway berm, we actually have no way of analyzing what the correct solution would be. So for that last proposal that is not on the table right now, just another word about consideration of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Anyone want to comment on that or anything else? All right, in a hurry, go ahead, Laura.
Lynn DeFreitas, that couldn't be here today, wanted me to announce something to the group, if you don't mind. She just wanted me to let people know that Friends will be celebrating the 2021 Alfred Lamborn Prize recipients at the Sorensen Unity Center on Salt Lake this Thursday, September 9th. The Lamborn Prize recognizes artistic expression inspired by the Great Salt Lake. Details are on Friends of Great Salt Lake website.
Thank you, Laura. Other comments? Thank you. Craig, thank you for your comments. We'll follow up and see if there isn't some way to piece something together. Let's move to the topic of future meeting topics. We have our Equation of State project that will be completed, and we'd like to have a report on that at the September meeting. We'll have the video that will be complete by then. We'd like to have that. It's been suggested that we have a presentation on the state water plan, and it's also been recommended that we have a presentation on Bear River Canal upgrade plans. So we have, again, more topics than time. We'll try and manage that, but I'm curious if there are other topics that council members would like to hear about at a future meeting, whether it's September or after that.
Don.
Tom.
This is a general inquiry. We have a Great Salt Lake management plan. It identifies, stress of the various resources and ecosystem, industry and whatnot at low levels. I'm curious if, one of our roles is to advise the governor and the legislature on action. Seems like a drought when the lake's near its lowest level ever. We could look at that plan and what would be our recommendations, from staff at the different levels within the DNR. And then we could help express that. It seems, well, I use a euphemism that many of you may have heard, don't let a good emergency go to waste. Well, our lake may be drying up, or this could be the first of many years of drought. So what should we be advising the state to do within its capacity? And certainly the governor has emergency powers as well.
Good comment, suggestion. Let us follow up with you on that, Tom. And in response to your final comment, I'd like to make a motion that we do not have many years of drought. Thank you. All in favor? All right. Other suggestions for meeting topics? Dan.
Would it be appropriate to ask the Utah Lake people to come up and talk to us once in a while about what they want to do with the canals?
Okay, thank you. That's a good suggestion. Others, by the way, Dan, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Sorry about that. I should.
It's a little late.
Finally hit 40, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Any other comments about future meetings or other business council members would like to raise? Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to our presenters for the substantive reports that we've received. We look forward to seeing you on September 8th. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Dina. Second. And any debate? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any nays, abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Nice to be back together again.